But I want to start with a question. Thank you. The question is, on the teams that you've been a part of, that you have maybe been a member of or a leader of, what has made for the most effective team? So I want you to think about a situation and where you excelled, and in this sort of collective team spirit of how your team achieved an extraordinary outcome. Maybe it was something that was a short-term goal, maybe it was a long-term goal. And I want you to write into the chat box some of the things that you did, some of the things that other team members did that brought out your best, that enabled the team to bring out their best and ultimately achieve this outcome. So go ahead and write those things into the chat box and let's see what you have. Okay, Anthony says freedom. Tom says trust. Great. And what do you mean by that exactly? Everyone knew the reason the team was in existence. Okay, good. So there was a real context for it and what the objective was. Honest, open communication, says Daniel. Creativity and open to risk, a common goal. Great, Yvonne, thank you for that. So what I'm hearing here is, there's certainly this sort of synergy, this sort of commonality where people are moving in the same direction. Paul said staff had confidence and support to do their job, so a sense of autonomy perhaps. This creative risk-taking, as Tom mentioned. So I want you to kind of keep this in mind, your own personal experience as we're going through this today. So I really want you to be asking the what's in it for me, or what has my experience showed me? Does this match my experience? And especially the sort of the feeling sense that you've had of that freedom, of that trust, of that common goal. What is the feeling sense that you've had on really effective teams? And I also want to kind of start with this frame for teams. Have you spoken about static teams versus teaming? Just give me a little feedback here. Raise of hands. Have you talked about yet this concept of teaming as opposed to a static team? Anyone? Yes, no, sometimes? Not sure?
Nope.
Oh, okay, great. So, I really think that this is the way that we need to think about teams going forward for the most part. That the old way of working was to have a static team like a sports team, a professional sports team perhaps even, where there's a set number of members on the team. Everyone has their particular job to do. There's I've been working with the Golden State Warriors a little bit, and they are, a set team. Yes, they exchange members between, occasionally between other professional teams, but everyone has their role, their job to do, and it's very defined. Same people, always on the court, at every game, at every practice. Is that really the way that we work these days? Does that resonate? Right in the chat box, does that resonate with, like, are you always on the same team in the organization, or is there more fluidity? Which is what I'm going to make the argument for, is that is the wave of the future, and that is how we that we should be thinking about teams as more as this fluid team that's more like a pop-up game in the park, where you don't really know who's going to show up, or you have some people who are there from week to week, but there's these sort of new members, and it's self-created, or it's people are kind of opting in or aspiring towards to be on that team. And so Daniel's saying the same tribe, but members shift between squads. Yeah, exactly, as needs arise. And I think this is the trend in business, that we're going to see this more and more, that it's more about a verb. A team is a verb, to team, and who knows who's going to be on it. Now, companies like McKinsey, have done a lot of work with McKinsey. This is their MO. This is the way that the consultants operate. They're always on new project, new team. Who knows who's going to be on it? Their team members are their clients. Their team members are their bosses. Their team members are the other consultants and other people with specialties within that. So we're thinking about this more as effective teaming, as opposed to this sort of static team, as I said, that I think is the way of the past, not the future. And so what are the team needs in order to have this effective teaming? This is my theory. This is my model for innovation. You can, it resonates with and inspired by Maslow's hierarchy of needs for an individual, where at the base, we need to have those stable, the basic needs met. For me, in a team, this is the basic needs of emotional intelligence. This is that having that self-awareness, having perspective and adaptability. This is where agile, the ability to then create agile stems from, is this ability to shift perspectives, to have self-awareness, to manage difficult emotions, to be resilient. And from there, when the individual at the individual level have that sort of ability, the fundamental capacity for a solid emotional intelligence, then that enables individuals to make that climate of psychological safety where people trust each other, where there is a sense of security, there's a sense of fairness, there's a sense of we're in this together, and you have my back. And so that's where then that enables the real work to come. So then that gets up to the level of leading others, of collaboration, and bringing out the best of the individuals and in the performance as well as in that team. So that's the mastery level, and that's inherently reinforcing, right? We love to gain mastery and to build our skills, to have challenges that stretch us and expand us and turn us into us and transform us into a sort of a way of being or an identity that was not previously there. So we love creating something from nothing. We love to transform as people, as not only just with our ideas. And from there, that's where the gold happens, that true innovation, having a greater impact, creating something that was not there before as a team, and in that sort of synergy and togetherness. And that's also where the challenging the status quo, like true change, comes about. And that's the realm of really having influence, both with each other as a leader and on the greater environment. How does this resonate with you? Do you see this? Do you see this in your teams? Does it make sense to you? Let's have a few comments. Does anyone want to unmute yourself and just make a comments or observation?
Yeah, so all of this makes a lot of sense. I think the question is around how to achieve this. Especially with teams fluctuating in membership, we don't really know our team members, and we don't generally have the time to build up a good relationship with them before there's a shift again.
Yeah, and that's exactly it, Daniel. So let's focus on, in the first 5 minutes, how can you establish the sort of emotional intelligence, psychological safety, and that can yield collaboration, mastery, and innovation. So let's get into it. Psychological safety. What is it? What is psychological safety to you? Unmute. Let's talk about it. What comes to mind? There's no right answer here. Just when you're so far with your exposure to, in your own words, what would you say? What's psychological safety? You can write it into the chat box or unmute and let's hear from you.
Hi, Laura. It's Pina here. I think if I go by my team, and I could have it wrong, but I think psychological safety is is when I know that I'm supported by the managers in difficult situations. You know, when I know that if I, like in our job at the moment, we have a system that is not working, so that they made a mistake when they developed it, and it's a lot of work at the moment. And usually we would have SLAs and tasks that we have to achieve per day. And it would put a lot of pressure on the team members, knowing that they have, I don't know, 10 cases a day to do, but they can't do it because of the system. But for me, for them, knowing that I am not looking into that until the system is working, it's giving them, you know, the peace of mind, so that they feel safe, that even if they don't achieve, they're supported and valued.
Yes. Okay, great. So it's this feeling sense that when things get tough, there's still a sense of togetherness, right?
Yeah.
Great. And so Amy Edmondson, who is, you know, I think the leader in defining this and defining why it matters and how it shows up, is that it's a climate, interpersonal climate, where people do feel safe bringing their full selves, being vulnerable, because that can feel vulnerable, and doing that risk taking, those learning experiments when you don't know, entering into that I don't know territory, whether it is because a mistake was made, an error was made, oops, that went wrong, or just trying new things, or bringing yourself of who you are, your ideas. I mean, think about this is actually quite intimate. Like, what do I think? What do I feel? What matters to me? Where do I go with these in this creative enterprise, in this brainstorm? What do I think is going to work? I mean, we talk about this as if it's just business as usual, you know, as these hard things, hard facts. But actually, when we are stretching beyond what we know, this is a very vulnerable, and I would even put forth it's vulnerable because it's intimate. We don't often talk about intimacy at work, but there's an intimacy to highly effective teams where they're bringing their authentic, real selves. Now, we'll come back to that and what that doesn't mean. It doesn't mean spewing all over and just revealing everything in an uncensored way, but it means really revealing what matters and why. I just want to, I'm sure you know the research by Project Aristotle. If you don't, you could take a look at it. But this really popularized, this Google study popularized the concept of psychological safety. It's been studied before this. These findings have been found previously, but this really put it on my map as a concept at work, which I find incredibly interesting, more than interesting. I'm passionate about this, that the #1 predictor of the highest performing teams is psychological safety. And the reason why I find this personally so interesting is, you know, my training is as a psychologist. I specialize in positive psychology. I bring these skills and trainings into companies and leadership development and effective teaming. But as a psychologist, what I already knew is that relationships in general, marriages, families, even at a societal level, the building block that predicts a successful marriage, that predicts crime at a societal level, and that predicts family harmony is trust. And I said, whoa, this is mind-blowing. In a sense, it's not. It's like normal. It's like, oh, we're humans. Great. You know, but this was the concrete evidence right here that trust is the glue within all relationships. It's no different just because we're at work. So what is psychological safety not? Everyone really kind of intuitively agrees. Yes, we want trust. I get it. I feel it. Like it was brought up. How do we do it? But I want to, although it's intuitive, most people get it wrong. Most people that I talk to think that psychological safety is about being nice. It's if we're going to be safe, then we have to be friendly. If we're going to create this sort of environment, then people can't get fired. They can't, what happens when they screw up? They can't be called out because it will make them feel unsafe. That's wrong, flat out wrong. But we can't do business like that. We can't have effective teams like that. I was working with a CFO, and it could have been anyone, but what he said is, he's like, Laura, okay, you know, I get it. I admit that my team doesn't feel a lot of psychological safety with me, but you have to understand, every day I bring bad news to my team. That's my job. And I quote, he says, I'm CFO. I'm supposed to be an asshole. I'm like, okay, yes, I hear you. And I think you're missing something here. He had told me that there was this team member who had, he'd had meeting after meeting after meeting with him. He's told me literally 5 times, he said, to put this piece of information into a report that was going to their biggest client, multi-million-dollar deal. And each time this guy said, yes, yes, yes. There was agreement. The report went out, and the CFO learned later, after the customer received it, that that critical piece of information wasn't in the report. And I said, okay, I'll call him Jeff. Jeff, why do you think that employee did not put that information in the report? He knew it was supposed to go there. He's like, yes, he absolutely know. He's going to get canned. And I said, maybe that's the right thing to do, but it's up to you as a leader. Shouldn't you know why he didn't put that in the report? Furthermore, if you knew that he didn't agree with you, if you had the relationship where he could say, you know what, Jeff, I don't agree, I'm not going to put this in, and the discussion could happen before the report went out, wouldn't you be in a better position? So that's the power of psychological safety. It's the answer to a fundamental evolutionary-based question, which is, are you with me or against me? If that employee felt like Jeff was with him on his team and he could have a candid discussion, I would bet that they would have had that discussion before the report went out. So we see all sorts of behaviors happening when the answer is no, I don't feel you're with me. We see avoidance, we see hiding, we see blame and finger pointing. We also see, and this is what I see in some of these in these teams in high-tech, high accountability environments, they say, you know, everyone's sort of posturing around here. Everyone's in a meeting trying to prove how smart they are. There's this sort of imposter syndrome and this excessive image management. That's also a sign of low psychological safety. But when it's high, then people are willing to engage in conflict. They're willing to take on those difficult conversations. They're more, and this studies show that teams that have a high level of psychological safety report more errors. They report making more mistakes. Take note, they report more errors. Doesn't mean they're making more errors, but they're reporting more errors. So they're brought up to the surface rather than hid, or rather than creating Band-Aid solutions and workarounds. They're more up to, you know, really go for solutions and to have those difficult conversations with care, with candor. Just one more thing I want you to think about in these high accountability environments, because that's really what we're talking about mostly these days, is that when there's high accountability and low psychological safety, that's the self-defense mode. That's the anxiety mode. Though that's where mistakes happen, bad ones, and they get hid, and then they come out later. They come out either, I've been working with a natural gas company, they come out in an accident, they come out in a plant shutdown, failure, they come out in failed results and outcomes. And so what we're really shooting for is this performance zone where there's cognitive diversity, where there's rapid learning and a willingness to stick your neck out there and say, I disagree, or I have a better idea, I think. And so just a note about diversity. A lot of companies are bringing me in right now to talk with their diversity and inclusion teams, how to create more inclusive teams. Because psychological safety is a must-have if you're going to have cognitive diversity. And if you have demographic diversity, including age diversity, location diversity, expertise diversity, you better have psychological safety, or else people are going to duck and hide, right? They're going to hide their diversity. And then you lose the benefit of those diverse teams. Diverse teams, the research very clearly, I'm sure you know this research, show that diverse teams, whether it's gender diversity, age diversity, demographic diversity, cognitive diversity, they make better decisions, they're more creative, more innovative, and that's why these investors are only investing in companies that have diverse boards, that have diverse leadership, and we're seeing that as a growing trend. Finally, right? It's because there are key business priority benefits to having diversity, but only if those teams have psychological safety do people bring that forth rather than self-censor and try to become like the rest. In other words, like ducking under and hiding their differences. Diverse teams are more uncomfortable. They have greater conflict, less social integration. People don't hang out as much together. When people are very different, you know, we're not going to coffee. We're not calling them up and sharing more of our personal lives. Think about for yourself when you have a very diverse team, people who you don't feel like, they don't feel like your tribe, but they do make better decisions, more creative. It can be more interesting. And so it's important to be aware of that just because there's a diverse team, it doesn't guarantee inclusion, and expect it to feel less comfortable, which is why we need even greater levels of psychological safety in our diverse teams, so that we don't go in this self-protection mode. And so when there's social friction, we need to have social friction less than that intellectual friction in order to bring out that cognitive diversity. Okay, so think for yourself, how much psychological safety do you feel on your team? Whatever team that might be, put it into the chat box on a scale of 1 to 5. How much psychological safety do you feel? If you're comfortable sharing that, just how much do you feel right now? That can change. And then while you're at it, include how much psychological safety do you think others feel with you? Not how much you aspire to have, but how much you think that they actually have. And let's see. Some 4s. What would you, some 2s, thank you for those, being honest, 3. And so what would enable you to feel even more psychological safety? What could others do? What could you do to increase your own feeling sense of psychological safety? As you're thinking about this, I want to take on some of this. Is it okay, Paul says, to speak your mind if you have concerns? And it's okay, feeling that, yeah, that it's okay. So that's that feeling of psychological safety. Thank you for that. Patience is one of those things. New strategies. What else? What other actions, when people do those, do you feel a greater sense of psychological safety? Now, maybe even take this into your personal life. Again, we're the same person, whether we're in, you know, are walking through our front door of our home or walking through the front door of our office when we used to go to offices. We're the same person. So when people show vulnerability themselves, sometimes to take the first step and be vulnerable. Yes, vulnerability is perhaps one of the biggest ways to create psychological safety. Not being afraid to express thoughts. Great. Okay. So Asking the question, as I just did, how much psychological safety do you feel, is crucial. You'd be shocked, maybe you wouldn't be shocked, I'm shocked at how leaders talk about valuing psychological safety, but they never ask their team, how much psychological safety do you feel? How much psychological safety do we feel with each other? And what I hear from a lot of teams is that they're hovering right about a 3, sometimes a 4. And those are the teams that are bringing me in. So they already value it. So I am guessing that if we did it across the board, it would be quite a bit lower. Okay. So this is what I believe are the 5 crucial categories or competencies of actions that build psychological safety. And I want to go through these. This is my take on the research. This is my take on what I'm seeing with my clients. First one, I call them the 5 C's choice. This is the foundation of emotional intelligence, the building blocks, the ability to respond rather than to react. Think about in your own life, if someone is highly reactive, when they're sort of a loose cannon, when you're not sure, they're unpredictable, you're not sure how they're going to respond, high sense of emotionally charged, then how safe do you feel with them? As opposed to someone who feels like they have the ability to take a step back and to assess the situation, to choose their response intentionally. Those tend to be the people who we trust far more, because they're predictable in their character. They're predictable in their sense of fairness and perspective taking. Now, I am using this tool that I created with people. Sometimes it's helpful to have a little mnemonic on it. So this is a tool for self-awareness to ask ourselves first, where am I? You know, there's this concept of above the line or below the line. Are you above the line? This is the above the line thinking and state is curiosity, openness, self-aware, measured. This is more in the realm of positivity and that building and broadened mode of positive emotions. This is where we are looking and focused on the win-win as opposed to win-lose contingencies. When we're below the line, we're triggered, often going to self-defense, reaction, rejecting, not engaging, withdrawing, or attacking, right? And so when we're in those states, and we all fall up and down on that continuum of above the line or below the line states, when you're slipping below the line, do you know it? Do you have the self-awareness to say, oh, wow? And then how do you move back up above the line? See how this relates to emotional intelligence, self-awareness, self-management. So 4 crucial steps, I believe, and is first, so I call this fast tracking. So first is the F, to focus, to say, where is my focus? So you get some bad news, you get an email, it comes in, the project that you've been working so hard on has just exploded. Say, let's just give that as an example. Where's your attention? Are you thinking about who did this? Who's to blame? Oh great, what are we going to do now? This sort of pessimism and there's nothing I can do, helplessness, hopelessness. What's your interpretation of the event? So that's the sort of cognitive piece. Where's your focus? To know that first. The second is to then notice what your attitude and emotional state is. What emotions are coming up? Anxiety, anger, those are 2 similar, but going to require very different responses, right? To manage them. Maybe there's some sadness, disappointment, maybe there's some embarrassment, maybe there's some, you know, sort of a hopelessness, depression type feeling of like, oh my gosh, nothing's going to go right, you know, or everything I try, I keep failing. Am I going to be able to do this job? You know, so that's that sort of, what's your attitude? What's your emotional state? The third one is less intuitive. This is, I think it's crucial. This is knowing what your physical shape is. So notice that when we are in this sort of above the line expansiveness, we're like looking up, or we're having this sense of creativity, of openness, of possibility. It feels very energizing and enlivening. But when we're in a state of anxiety and fear, we go into this very narrow kind of, if we had a shape to our emotions, what would they be? It would be narrow, it would be focused, it would be withdrawn, or maybe very much clenched and attacking, trying to control what's uncontrollable, as opposed to feeling and influencing. So think about a most recent challenge that you had, and what was that sort of physical shape that you were in? Were you expanded? Were you clamped down, constricted? And which one would be more effective? Neither is right or wrong. They both have roles. They both have a job to do. But to reach your goal, where do you need to be? And then the T is the tactics. So which behaviors, which tactics, which actions are you taking, either consciously, unconsciously? Which ones could you take that would be most effective? Are you going to fight for it? How are you going to fight for it? You're going to fight by inviting and welcoming and asking and with curiosity, or you're going to fight for it with blame and shaming and self-blame and everyone else is in the room blame? Going to be, bring that sort of perseverance, or is it time to shift and to approach it from a different angle? So what are your tactics? So this is a tool that I use with leaders and with teams to increase their sense of self-awareness. Let's pause for a moment. Questions or comments? Can you imagine using this? Does this resonate with you? Do you have any questions? Sometimes the shape, the physical shape is a little bit less intuitive. Questions, comments on anything about the first C of choice? Challenges that you have when you find yourself below the line and trying to get back up above the line?
I think it's really in regards to, the two things, what is the situation and what is my reaction to the situation. So I think it's really useful, all those points that were stated, to kind of be able to take the step back and realize actually that how I feel doesn't necessarily means that the situation is, and help to shift that focus into something that will work and, that can bring some solution and a better kind of outcome, be it for just myself or even, if this is used with the team.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really about like, where am I and what could I do? How could we? And I love that question of asking, how could I, or how could we? Because that puts the mind on an expedition, turns the focus to a goal, to creating something new. So thank you for that. And a lot of times people ask me, well, how can I create psychological safety when my leader or my company is not safe? And so that's why I think it's so important to go to first the choice that you have as an individual. Let's turn to the second one. This was talked about already, about vulnerability, having the courage to bring a sense of yourself to make the courageous choice of vulnerability. So often we see vulnerability as a weakness, but how could it be a strength? And so I want to ask you, what are some behaviors that really show vulnerability, but do it in a way that it's not, throwing up your hands and letting go of the helm and letting the ship toss it around in the rough waters, but instead hanging on to the helm, but still showing vulnerability. Because this is the piece here that I get, and I'll also point out that I've had more often than men say this, I've had women say this, women leaders say that, are you kidding me? Vulnerable? That's the last thing I'm going to do. That's what they expect me to be, is vulnerable. And you know what? They're right. There's that gender bias is absolutely correct. So the question is not Should I be vulnerable? But how to bring that sort of authentic vulnerability without being disempowering, without giving up your power, without losing that sort of status within the social environment, because we are social animals. So what does that mean to be vulnerable? So I want you to really think about that. What are some behaviors? Type it into the chat box. What are some behaviors that as a leader you can exhibit that model vulnerability? Because this perhaps is the #1 behavior that a leader could choose to take that increases psychological safety. And not just a leader, but as a team member. So use humor. Flavio says, it would just make mistakes and show to the team that you are human. Lead by example. Show empathy. I'm actually using that with my team. Great. Inviting challenge and accepting others' point of view. Ask for help, said David. Yes, I think the 3 most dreaded words in the English language are I need help, right? Ask for solutions, says Shauna. Great, thanks. So one thing that I like to encourage people to do is to share your learning journey. So a learning journey is that this bad thing happened or this challenge happened, and then how I grew and how I succeeded was, or maybe you didn't succeed in the end. Maybe it was just a real problem that then that happened, but maybe you grew from it. That is a sort of way of being heroic and victorious. So thinking about how can I bring that we are all human around here in a way where you're standing tall in your vulnerability. And a lot of times there is that emotional exposure of I don't know, or none of us have been here before. I don't know how to do this. Mark Benioff, I was working with a guy at Salesforce, and he said that in their that Mark Benioff said in one of their town halls, he keeps getting asked by other media and other people in his sort of leadership cohort, how do you lead through a pandemic? And Mark says, I don't know. I've never led a company through a pandemic. We're figuring this out together. And so that I thought was a great example of modeling that. So curiosity is the third. Curiosity is the seed of empathy, of being curious. What is your experience? And conflict, I believe, is a call for curiosity. Think about it when there's conflict, when we're communicating across differences. We're both experiencing the same event, the same fact, but we're coming to different conclusions, different tactics. We are standing in the same room and we're thinking that the other person is like from another universe. Like, how can that happen? That is fascinating. That is fascinating that we can experience the same event but come to different conclusions. So this is a call for saying, why, how, please help me understand. And I'm especially passionate about curiosity now because, I think that we would all agree that that's one of the key components that we need in order to make it through these huge amount of adversity, a huge amount of polarization that's happening worldwide. We're certainly seeing it here in the US. I know you're seeing it over in Europe as well, seeing it in lots of different countries and nations. We're seeing it within our own families and within our own teams. So what happens at the micro level also cascades out like a fractal, really. Those patterns repeat themselves at a macro level. So bringing that sense of curiosity, how can you do that? How can you do that in a way that's not overstepping, but is also getting real? So ask questions, ask questions, ask follow-up questions. So ask more than tell, listen more than speak. Curiosity, empathy begins with listening. As a leader, your job, as a rule of thumb, is to speak last, right? As soon as we give our opinion as a leader, then it silences everyone because now they want to follow in suit. Leader always speaks last. The fourth is one of my favorite is co-elevate. What does that mean? What does that mean to co-elevate? This is this concept of stronger together, but what team actions elevate others? Which team actions do you see with when you do it, it brings out other people's best? I want you to put this into the chat box now. What are the behaviors that elevate you? And what are the behaviors that you notice when you do or others do? It elevates others so that this sort of collective success emerges. Recognized achievements in the team. Yes, Daniel, thanks. I think this is one of the two most important actions in this co-elevation. So I have another acronym for this. I love acronyms because it helps us remember. And then it gives a common language. I call it big recognition. And I bring this into almost all of my trainings. Big recognition is a way of delivering an impactful expression of appreciation and recognition. Again, intuitive. Everyone wants to say thank you, to acknowledge others, but most people do it really poorly. If it doesn't have, if your expression of appreciation lacks emotional impact, then you're missing the mark. And most of our expressions of appreciation lack emotional impact. They don't actually change the feeling state of the other person. Maybe like, 2%. I think we can do better than that. So, so how do you do that? One is the big BIG, behavior. So get very specific. Specificity breeds credibility, and it matters here. So identify what was the specific behavior. So when you, Anthony, reached out to me and said that you would like me to come in and provided me with the context and the information and were very welcoming, then I felt very inspired and enabled me to feel like I was ready to come on in to the group today, and that it would be a fun and interesting experience. The impact, so that's the behavior, and then the impact is what effect did it have on you, and specifically on you as a person, also on the team, how it enabled you to bring out your best, how it enabled the team to reach their outcome, their goal. The G is often the one that we forget. We might do the first two, but the G stands for, can you guess what it is? The greater pattern or character trait. So this is, this was really helpful to me, and I have this sense that you are a team member in general, that you are willing to reach out to other people. I see you as passionate about your work, and there's a spirit of generosity in that. So when we can see the person as a person and not this one behavior just as a fluke, but as potentially a pattern, that really brings a sense of empathy and elevation to it. So this can be done with people you know. It can be done going back to that we don't have time to really build those bridges. Well, we do have time. It can take 15 seconds. It can take 30 seconds of just saying, hey, thank you for welcoming me here today, of saying that made a difference for me. When you just offered that bit of information, that really helped move our conversation forward. All right, so the second piece before I wrap up is that to co-elevate. The first one is that expression of appreciation. The second one is soliciting input and feedback. But the thing is, how we ask matters. What are the ways you can ask for input that will really get difficult or opposing or dissenting input? How will you know when people actually disagree with you? How you ask matters. Rewarding the messengers. Thank you for telling me I was wrong. How you ask is not just, do you have any feedback for me, but instead getting specific. What part of this resonated for you? So even in the chat box, what part of today resonated with you? What are some of the challenges that you could imagine applying these concepts and practices? And the third is create team procedures that support candor. So having check-ins, Shauna said that doing personal check-ins, which is great. You could take a candor break and you could say, hey, and this is great, by the way, in remote teams with video conferencing. You know, what's not being said right now? Who hasn't spoken? What's not being said and needs to be said? What's the elephant in the room? Let's all break out into smaller groups that are going to have more psychological safety, 2 or 3 or 4 people, and let's talk about it. What's not being said? Let's write it down. Create a document, a live document, a Google Doc, perhaps I use all the time with groups. Create this document about what's not being said, then come back into the room and either review it later and have the continuation meeting the next day, or talk about what people just brainstormed. So take a candor break. Ask what's not being said. Who hasn't spoken? Let's hear a dissenting opinion. People will assign roles, challenger roles. What do they call it? There's like the tiger role, being that's the job of the person to give an opposing view. If you assign it, it makes it safer. So it's giving that sort of air cover for candor that's expected, that we want to hear from you, that we need to hear from you. So what could you do to solicit more candid input, to increase that diversity of thought? Because that's where the juice happens. And the last is the 5 of those 5 C's is commitment. So of course, if we have a vision without committed action, it's just a fantasy, right? We need not only grit, but to also dive in and to have that vision that we're working towards with discipline, with intention on a daily basis. So I want to ask you, what is one action that you are going to commit to right now to take, one committed action that can increase the sense of psychological safety in your team, with each other, even in this class, or maybe you can practice at home as well with team members, with someone who disagrees with you, and how will you bring that forward? So in the chat box, going to ask you to actually do that. For more resources, my resources, there are lots of other great ones, but I'll provide you with some that I've written. These are the 4 books I've written. They're available on Amazon. If you want them, I can access a discount, but you have to email me directly. Sorry about that, I don't have a code. But I'm happy to do that and get them for you at a much discounted rate. Also, you can check out my article on high performing teams and HBR. And I want to end with a belief I have. I believe that it's not that we ask too much of ourselves, it's that we ask too little. Why not? Why not dare to discover ways that we can elevate each other, that we can elevate our own lives, our families, our organizations, our communities? Why not create systems and procedures that cultivate this sense of togetherness, that put structures in place so that it's easier to interact and connect, build trust? Why not dare to dream a little bit higher and to not only be, to care about our work and each other, but to actually love our work and love each other? Why not elevate and create ways that elevate humanity to the unimaginable? I think we can do it, and together we're better. So thank you for having me here today. If you have any questions, I have a minute or 2, if Anthony, if that's all right. Otherwise, you can feel free to email me at laura@delizonna.com, and I'm happy to continue the conversation there.
And there's one question in chat that Alison put in earlier. How do you help others become more self-aware?
How do I help others become self-aware? Well, it depends on the context for sure. That's a huge one. Depending on how much trust you already have is the main thing. So you can ask a not so challenging questions of how did that land for you, or how is that, or just what are your goals and aspirations, right? That's a very safe question. To is there anything here that you think you're missing, or I'm concerned, or I'm curious about. Reflecting back is a really strong and safe way to help others become self-aware. What I hear you saying is, did I get that right? It sounds like this was tough for you. What was the most difficult part about it? It sounds like that was really exciting. How did it feel to achieve your goal? You know, so asking these questions that take it down a layer deeper can be a really powerful way to help another to kind of coach them into a greater sense of self-awareness. Great, so Flavio has a commitment. I'm going to assess the felt safety of my team. Excellent. Like the idea of candor time. I'll take a look at what to do forward. Thank you.
Laura, can I just ask you a question? Sorry, it mightn't be a quick answer, but where I struggle sometimes to kind of build that candor is it's nearly certain cultures, you know, that they don't naturally feel comfortable to challenge or to question, say, the manager or a more senior individual in the company. So how do you start to shift that perspective when it is embedded in their culture?
Yeah, this is a great question. There are cultural differences in challenging the status quo in particular, among other things, but this is one of them that's big. And so creating, getting creative with how to do that. So I just, for example, was working with a senior manager from a major tech company that we're all familiar with. And he just spent 2 months in China with his team of engineers there. And so this is one of the things we were talking about, because he said it's embedded in the culture. When, we're here, and the team in California is all about, like, putting forth ideas and putting themselves out there as an individual. But his team in China had a very different perspective. It was very much of following what they were told, of following. And this, might be different across different teams, but this was his experience and his take on it. And so, first of all, like, acknowledging that and then trying to understand. So I was working with him to try to understand, what does one feel safe for them? How do they express? So is it safer for them to express one-on-one? Okay, that's valuable information as opposed to in a team meeting. Also, what is, how you ask matters. So it might be asking more in terms of, how could we as a team improve each other's, to support each other, as opposed to what do you need in order to feel supported, taking it more to the collective whole. I was giving a talk once, and it's not just in East Asia where this shows up, but this was also, this was in Vietnam. I was giving a talk, and we were just talking about appreciation, how to, expressing appreciation and gratitude. And the group, a woman raised her hand and she said, well, I don't want to feel grateful for what people have done for me, because that feels selfish. I want to focus on what I have done for them. And so that was very illuminating as a Western perspective. That had never come up in all of the groups I'd ever talked to. And so taking it through that lens and then doing some inquiry. And it's always helpful if you can have, you know, they talk about having like a broker or a cultural broker to help you understand of the culture, whether it's just because it's a different company or a different team. You're working with salespeople compared to lawyers, you know, like they have different cultural norms. And so talking within and doing that kind of cultural investigation of, all right, these are my ideas, this is where I want to go, but I have a blind spot here, I don't know. And so really getting information from the inside can be very, very helpful. You can always do your own research, but it's invaluable, right, to have someone to help translate. So those are just a couple of ideas. There's no easy answer on that for sure, but that you're asking the question is the crucial first step.
Thank you.
Okay. I don't want to overstep our time, so please feel free to send any message, or if you want any additional resources, I'm happy to support. So thank you for having me here today.